As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so shall you be. Most of modern cities and life is designed to avoid the fact that death exists. People don't see it anymore the way I did as a child. Death is a telephone call from a doctor. A lot of what we see in this crisis now is the triumph of fear. People are afraid, and people like being afraid more than they're prepared to admit, and also people like being told what to do more than they're prepared to admit. Freedom's not that popular. Fear is not as disliked as people like to let on. The great thing about religion is that it took fear out of politics and out of society. Again, Edmund Burke, a man who truly fears God will fear nothing else. One of the things about a religious view of the universe is that you understand that what you do here matters somewhere else. If you genuinely believe, or can persuade yourself that it's enough of a likelihood to bet on, that death is not the end, then your concerns will be wholly different. But once that idea has gone, and I think the 20th century in Western countries has more or less killed the idea that death is not the end and that God is supreme in the universe. Death is not the end. Justice is worth fighting for.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Peter Hitchens, the British journalist, author, and political commentator. You write a weekly column for the world's most visited news website, the Mail Online, and have previously contributed to a range of publications across the political spectrum, including The Spectator, The American Conservative, The Guardian, and The New Statesman. You published 9 books, including The Abolition of Britain, The Rage Against God, and The War We Never Fought, and have been awarded the Orwell Prize in Political Journalism and Columnist of the Year at the British Press Awards. For the past 6 months, you've been a vocal critic of both the government's pandemic response and the fear-mongering of the mainstream press, calling for an end to the panic that is stifling this great nation of ours. Peter, welcome to London Real.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I should point out, by the way, that the column I write is written actually for the newspaper, the Mail on Sunday, which Mail Online then publishes online, but it is actually written for the newspaper.
Okay, excellent. Good. Just before we started, I just wanted to tell everybody that we're streaming now on our Digital Freedom platform, which is a censorship-free independent broadcasting system that is of the people, by the people, for the people, and it's available exclusively on our website at freedomplatform.tv. Just want to ask everybody watching now to share this link on their social media and just, ask people to give us 15 minutes and then they can decide. Peter, I pledge to you and everybody watching this that none of this conversation will be edited, censored, removed, or banned, and that anybody in the world can watch the full version of this episode free at freedomplatform.tv/Hitchens. Thanks to the generous donations of 38,000 people around the world. Also, if anybody wants to become a founding member, they can go to freedomplatform.tv/give to fight with us on the front lines to protect our human right for freedom of speech. London Real, we have a platform for free speech since 2011, and I'm excited to have you here today. I had an incident this morning I wanted to get your thoughts on. I walked my son, Caden, who's 4 years old, to his very first day of school. And as you can imagine, he was nerve-wracked a little bit to go to a new place. But we got there and the teachers are wearing these plastic visors, and I was asked to put on rubber gloves, and then I had to put on a mask. And when he's trying to understand what's happening, he's looking at his father, and he can't understand my expressions. And I'm thinking he's going to grow up in this world where, he can't see expressions on people's faces, that maybe we fear that other people are infecting us. And I just thought to myself, wow, this is not the world I want him to grow up into. And so I wanted to ask you, what is your take on everything that's happened the past 5 months? You seem to see this coming. I saw an interview with you and Piers Morgan on March 31st, and you had already seemed to understand kind of what was happening. But what are your thoughts on what's happened here and what we need to do to change this whole narrative?
This is what happens when incompetent people panic. We have, partly because of the degradation of the education systems of most Western countries in the past 50 years, and for other reasons as well, we have a political class which is composed of undistinguished people who know very little, who have very little experience, and who, when confronted with any kind of crisis, don't know what to do. On this occasion, they were advised strongly by people that they should take extreme and disproportionate measures, and they didn't have the sense to say no. And having made this grotesque mistake, which they must now understand was a mistake, particularly economically, but also politically, they are afraid to admit it. And the only thing to do is for them to continue with it almost endlessly, as far as I can see. And my task and the task of my trade ought to be to make them admit the mistake, because until the mistake is admitted, we will continue. For instance, it is undoubtedly the case that the disease, COVID-19 or whatever you wish to call it, has killed large numbers of people, and is obviously very unpleasant if you get it, and nobody should minimize it. But it simply did not justify the scale of the measures which were taken against it. And some of the measures which were taken seem to have made it worse, especially for old people in care homes, who it appears have died in unnecessarily large numbers because of mistakes made. And I think that these things need to be considered. But the thing which I've said from the beginning is that this action was out of proportion. And disproportionate actions are taken in panic. And panics are what happen when you're being run by people who don't really know what they're doing. And that's been fundamentally my understanding from the beginning. And I've carried on saying it. And I will carry on saying it as long as I may. And I will carry on saying it until the point is reached, either where my cause is defeated and there's no further point, or a substantial number of people in politics and the media and the academy and everywhere else come round to the same view. And there is an inquiry in which the government is condemned for its folly, and the people responsible are sent off into the obscurity which they so deeply merit. And that's all we can do. And in a free society, though it's the freedom society, one of the bizarre outcomes of this, the freedom society in which we live is diminishing all the time, and it's one of the most disturbing aspects of it. And there is an almost constant brewing of fear, and out of fear, power is distilled. I think it's ridiculous to try and say that there was any kind of plan to achieve any of this, but I think a number of people have rather enjoyed the amount of power that has come their way as a result of it, and don't at the moment have any plans to give it up. Bizarrely, the most extreme examples of this have been in the Anglosphere countries, which are supposedly the most protected by Magna Carta principles and Bills of Rights and general protections of freedom. And yet you look at Victoria in Australia, and it's under what looks very much to me like a despotism at the moment, with people confined to their homes and police rounding up protesters and visiting the homes of people who support protests and handcuffing them. It's extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it in my life, and I've seen some pretty strange things in quite a long life and a lot of traveling.
I think it was Rahm Emanuel, who I think was one of Obama's advisors, later became mayor of Chicago, who said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Although I'm sure he quoted people
I think
it's
been a long-standing view.
Yeah.
It's undoubtedly the case. If there's a crisis, that's the time to do the things you've longed to do for a long time. But that would be paying too much of a compliment, I think, to the people who sit in the government of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, who are fundamentally intellectually undistinguished persons, who I don't think had any particular plan. And they just floundered. They just got it wrong. And now they double down on their mistake.
I remember when they were easing the lockdown and it just wasn't happening very fast. And I thought, this couldn't be just to cover up a bad decision that was made 3, 4, 5 months ago. Because it seems like they could just reset things and say...
No, it doesn't work, because it's very easy. And there are documents from the fascinating one, from the SAGE committee, the government's advisory committee of the scientists, right back on March 22nd, a paraphrase. It basically says people aren't scared enough, we need to scare them more. And that's what they then did on March the 23rd, when we were all ordered to stay at home and put under effective house arrest. And once you have set fear in motion, it's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. You can't stop it. People are afraid. Now, for whatever reason it is, and I wouldn't like to say, this has never affected me in the slightest. I always thought the thing was an absurd over-response. But a lot of people I know, and these are people who are, in many cases, extremely well-educated, experienced in life, are completely paralyzed with fear of this thing. Yeah. They really think it's going to get them. And these are not fools. And then again, you will come across, for instance, I visited a small shop a couple of weeks ago, and the shopkeeper said, "You can't come in here without a mask." And I said, "Well, excuse me, I'm exempt from wearing a mask." He said, "Not here, you're not. My kids come in here." He said, "This is my home." As if his children were at terrible risk for me breathing out a disease I don't have in his shop. He genuinely believed it. And this is the thing that is disturbing. I mean, I didn't mind particularly. I could always go to another shop. The thing which worried me about the encounter was he and some of his customers who joined in the discussion genuinely believed that they were at great danger of contracting a deadly plague-type disease, much like the 1918 influenza epidemic. And they really, really thought that. Even after all these months, they still thought so. And that's where we are. Once you've brewed up that fear, it doesn't go away. You can't readily count. There's only one thing which would dispel it, and that would be an admission of error by the people who originally set it up. If they said we were wrong from the start, this was all a stupid mistake, that would dispel it, but nothing else will, and that's the one thing they won't do.
And that fear it's being used as a weapon, and we've seen that being used throughout history, but it's a way to change the entire freedom of a country. Even in a place like China, we see that being used.
Well, yeah, but no, the countries in which you and I have grown up are exceptions.
Yeah.
Most people's countries, there's a Hobbesian bargain. The government sets itself up as the people's protector in return for having an enormous amount of authority over them. In the Anglosphere countries, uniquely, this wasn't so. In the Anglosphere countries, there was a large measure of genuine freedom. The government stayed out of people's lives, and everything was legal unless it was specifically made illegal. In other countries, it was quite evident. When I lived in the Soviet Union, everything was illegal unless it was specifically stated to be legal. It was the exact opposite way around. There's a middle bit in the other continental countries, which have sort of got carefully designed democracies, but they really don't have the levels of freedom which we have. I mean, for instance, in Germany, a very free and well-run country in many ways, it's illegal to educate your children at home. And you have to register with the police before you can be connected to the electricity supply. So there are variations of this, which to an English person brought up in my era are absurd and oppressive. But for most people, there is the Hobbesian bargain. We protect you. In return, you must give us authority over you. And the really peculiar thing is this is now extending to countries which have spent centuries boasting that they didn't actually have to undergo it. And now we may have a terrific row in this country about whether the song Rule Britannia, Britain's Never, Never, Never Shall Be Slaves, can be sung at a concert. Well, who cares whether it can be sung? The question is it true?
Do you think we wouldn't be having that discussion if it wasn't for the lockdown?
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, it's a different thing. I find it's banal. And if anyone hasn't yet realized that the British Broadcasting Corporation is an organ of the cultural left, then they're very slow on the uptake. They've been trying to get rid of patriotic songs from the last night of the prom since 1969.
Let's talk about the media a little bit then.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not. It's just the things that people are surprised about and worried about, and the things that they're unsurprised about and unworried about, always astonishing. Just like Michael Kinsley's great statement, the shocking thing is always not what's illegal, what's legal.
You know, you mentioned really quickly Australia and some of the measures happening there, these like kind of draconian measures. When you look at America, I mean, what do you see that stands out for you? And do you ever see some of these measures going back? Because again, this is, land of the free, home of the brave. This is like you said, that bargain that they had with the people, but we don't see that
Well,
happen.
I lived for 2 years in the United States, and I ended up more confused about it at the end than I was at the beginning. It seemed to me to be a country fundamentally German in ethos, but British in rules. And the ethos is always in conflict with the rules. But it has, I think there is a quite deep reservoir of authoritarianism in the United States, which is only kept at bay, actually, by the Constitution on some occasions and by the Bill of Rights. And it didn't surprise me anything like as much as Australia surprised me. And Australia is supposed to have this sort of rebellious spirit and be a country of people who don't stand for much. And yet it's ended up being probably the most, Victoria in Australia anyway, the single most repressed place in the Anglosphere.
And so America doesn't surprise you as much.
I wasn't as surprised. If I hadn't lived there, I would have been more surprised. But in fact, you get used to it. There's always been alongside the liberty, there's always been a very heavy-handed side of authority. There's semi-militarized police forces and the iron bureaucracy that you come up against. People always used to laugh about Soviet bureaucracy, but American bureaucracy has quite a lot to be said against it too. And it is, to me, it has a very, and in the armed services, particularly a very Germanic feel as well.
Yeah, I could probably comment a bit more of that as I think about it. You know, we talked about weaponization of fear, and we've seen how that has been taken and being used against what normally would be very intelligent people able to make intelligent decisions about their biology. But it's also kind of the weaponization of data. I mean, we're seeing this whole narrative around testing, and who's testing positive as opposed to who's dying. And we see it a lot in America. We're seeing it a lot here. We're seeing it with these quarantines and things like that. What's going on here?
Well, I don't know what's going on. It's a failure. Again, it's a failure of intelligence on the part of the people who are supposed to examine these things. It's perfectly obvious, isn't it? If you test more, you'll get more results. So I had to write a story in my Mail on Sunday column a few weeks ago. The city of Leicester was being closed down again because supposedly it had more infection. So I rang up the relevant authorities and I said, "Excuse me, but have you been setting up more testing centres?" And they said, "Oh yes." In the week before the test figures had gone, they'd opened, I think, 8 more testing centres in Leicester, which is not that big a city. And later on, the week after that, they were actually going around knocking on people's doors from door to door, asking them whether they wouldn't mind being tested. The same thing happened in my own hometown of Oxford a couple of weeks ago. I think 40 people in a city of a population of 150,000 were said to be infected, a word carefully crafted to conceal the fact that they're almost certainly not ill, were said to be infected. And this level of infection was supposed to be so dangerous that it was an amber alert, and if it got much worse, then there would be a red alert and we'd all be forced to stay at home or whatever it was that they would come up with. And I knew of people who were being written to and then texted on their telephones, saying, "Will you please come and be tested?" And Oxford already has one quite large test centre, and they opened another one. And even despite all this, they couldn't get enough people to get their red alert on this occasion. But it seemed to me that the suspicion that they wanted to get the figures up couldn't be avoided.
Being used politically, being used to cover tracks.
You just need to ask. I mean, it just doesn't take a huge application of intelligence or mathematics to say, if you test more, you'll get more positive tests. But what does it mean? What are those positive tests? Are these people ill? Does it matter? Is it comparable to the parallel figures, wholly different in many ways, mathematically and medically, that we had back in March or April, where in fact there was hardly any testing going on, but the figures for positive tests were higher. Now, why was that? You just need to look at it again. And a correspondent of mine made some graphs showing the contrast between the numbers of tests and the numbers of deaths. And the relationship between these two in March and April was completely different from the relationship now. So the tests are showing something different, but the authorities and much of the media, especially the BBC, behave as if these test figures mean the same as they would have done in March or April. And they use them to speak as if to have a discourse which suggests that this means we must once again go back into a restrictive way of life.
What about the test itself? Because as we learn more about this PCR
I know
test,
nothing about it. I can't talk about it. I just simply know nothing about testing. I've heard people say that it's not reliable. Well, they may be right. I don't know. But let's assume, for the purposes of this, that the test is reliable. Even if it is wholly reliable, or 99% reliable, or whatever you want, even if that is so, the fact is still the same. If you test more, you'll get more results. The question is, what do these results mean?
it's September now. It's going to get colder. We're going into the winter. We're going into flu season. The second wave is on everyone's mind. What do you expect as a narrative to look out for? Or what do you see potentially happening with not only lockdowns, the economy, testing, et cetera?
Well, one has to worry. There is many years in this country, and I think in most countries there is a winter flu crisis of some kind or another in hospitals. There have been quite serious ones in recent years in which tragically large numbers of people, often older people with comorbidities, have died. And it's perfectly possible this will happen again. I think we should just be very vigilant to make sure that and under these circumstances, who's going to be particularly spending an awful lot of time deciding what these people have got? We've already had, back in March, April, May, a very lax system of classification of which deaths were listed as COVID-19. In fact, indeed, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Jenny Harris, admitted at a government press conference these are deaths with COVID, not necessarily of. And though she said it, most of the reporting of it never actually took that into account. We may well be in a situation where there are deaths of people who are classified as of being with COVID, but which are not deaths of it. I just would ask my media colleagues to be a good deal more vigilant than they have been so far. And I would ask the public to be more vigilant on this. Don't necessarily accept that what you're being told is accurate, because it often isn't. A lot of these statistics are actually misleading. And why this is, I'm not going to speculate, but it's demonstrable that they are. And if someone as senior and distinguished as Dr. Jenny Harris is prepared to say that with and of mean a different thing, then it's obviously a significant fact which responsible people need to take into account.
Yeah, we've seen like the CDC in America, depending on what you believe, saying that only 6% of those numbers were actually accurate or fully COVID, and then the UK changed their numbers of the
There was a change in numbers recently, but that was due to a timing issue. But they did have to reduce the numbers. There's a big problem here. An awful lot of the people who are most vocal in criticizing these events are anti-vaxxers, people who believe that Bill Gates is trying to take over the world, people who believe there's a plot to force us all to be vaccinated. Let them think and say what they wish, but they are a terrible nuisance to the cause. Because there are sensible criticisms of this to be made, which have nothing to do with any of those things, which they obscure. And there was a demonstration in London the weekend before last, and it was dominated by such people. And there were, no doubt, serious people with normal concerns there. But these zealots destroy the power of protest by, as it were, getting in the way. I would only say to them that they really have to understand just how much a complacent government rejoices every time they come out and dominate the debate about this. I would so wish that they would go away and leave it to people who have sensible, factual, researched objections to what's going on. It's been a disaster for dissent that these people have clustered around in.
Because the anti-vaccine people trigger a whole response, which is they must be crazy and everything they're saying is crazy. So let's talk about the science.
We could argue about vaccinations, but I'm not going to. The fact is there are in the world quite a lot of people who are obsessed with things, who are fanatical about them, and who are not terribly particular about facts. And as soon as they appear on the stage next to you, then you've had it, because while you're explaining as James Carville once said, you're losing. While you're saying, look, I'm not these people, I'm not the same. All of the television watching millions see is that you're sharing a platform with nutcases and your cause is lost.
Right.
And it's been a disaster. I did beg them to stay away.
I think you're referring to the protest that happened in London a week and a half ago, or 2 weeks ago.
No, it was the Saturday before last.
Right. And that was technically originally maybe a protest against masks, lockdown measures, but it ended up being maybe co-opted by lots of different groups.
Well, they said, oh, you have a demonstration. But there were people on the platform who were, I think, tending in that direction, and it's of course banners and flags in the crowd. From which you can't then dissociate yourself. And it was a shame, because the fundamental message that people are getting extremely worried about their loss of both personal liberty and economic future and all the rest of it was destroyed by it, because there were important things to be said, and normal concerned human beings could have been at that demonstration, and they would have possibly felt themselves a bit uncomfortable there.
An arrest was made. Piers Corbyn was arrested.
Well, the arrest was afterwards, but the fascinating thing about the arrest was it was made on the basis of a law which had been made about 24 hours before the demonstration began, and a law which had been made not by Parliament, by what I was taught through all my childhood and school days, the process of green paper, white paper, first reading, second reading, committee stage, House of Lords revision, back to the Commons. All that didn't happen. A minister who I think is mainly qualified as being a former computer software salesman issued a decree. And at some point in the next 2 or 3 weeks, Parliament will retroactively vote to approve it on the basis of a law made in 1984 to deal with quarantines for diseases. Now, here's a fascinating thing. In all the history of mankind, quarantine has been about confining the sick to prevent them from infecting the healthy. For the first time ever, as far as I know, in human history, we have a quarantine which confines the healthy. Never been done before. So the legal basis of this, the 1984 Public Health Act, is very skimpy. And if we had a proper functioning Parliament, and frankly, if we had properly vigilant courts, I think this would already have been substantially challenged, but we don't. And also we don't seem to have, for the most part, a questioning media. So again, it just happens. Parliament in this country is dead. I call it the dead parrot Parliament. It's dead because it does nothing. It's a parrot because it repeats what the government tells it to.
And you wrote in detail in your column yesterday, I think, about this. And as you said, they can kind of concoct this legislation with they don't have to explain it. It doesn't have to be debated, and it can happen. And under lockdown, there were many laws and acts that were created
again, day after day after day. Out they came, and they were changed almost willy-nilly. And it's government partly by decree, and partly as Lord Sumption, a former Supreme Court judge here, has said, partly by televised press conference. This is not a functioning law-governed democracy anymore. This is a tin pot television despotism.
Now contrast that protest to the other protests we saw weeks ago with Black Lives Matter protests. Were those treated differently because of politics, ideology?
The new law had not been made at that time. The law which enabled a police officer of no rank at all to impose a fine of £10,000, a substantial sum, on Piers Corbyn. Now, that law didn't exist then. I think that there are criticisms to be made of the lack of even-handedness of the policing of various different types of demonstration. Yes, but that particular law was made, and you can draw whatever conclusions you like, that was made 24 hours before the demonstration to which it was first applied.
Right, and I watched some of those speeches given in Trafalgar, and I was shocked to see him pulled away by police after, because I didn't see any causation or correlation between what he said.
And no doubt he would have gone perfectly quietly fast as well. It's you look at this and you see the events in Melbourne in Australia over the weekend. The extraordinarily heavy-handed policing of a quite small demonstration in a war memorial park in Melbourne. You think, look at this. What is this? It doesn't look like a free society.
And when you see...
Looks like Belarus, actually.
Yeah, well, yeah, it looks like Belarus, yeah. And when you see that, but when you see also, for example, a protest from the left where do you see those are not being enforced? Do you think there are double standards that's being accused of happening in the States? For example, Black Lives Matter versus protesting lockdown.
I think there are criticisms to be made, yes, but there hasn't. The protesting against the lockdown is quite recent. The Black Lives Matter and the pulling down of statues is older. I think there has been a police feebleness towards certain causes for some time. And that's partly because the police in this country have very much been captured by the Cultural Revolution, particularly in the past 10 years. And they tend to be led by people who have pretty radical ideas and who are not necessarily unsympathetic to Black Lives Matter or Extinction Rebellion or other causes. And so that's not new in British terms. The revolutionizing of the police, something I've written about a lot, has been a very long process. And the installing, for instance, of Dame Cressida Dick as head of the Metropolitan Police was a clear sign. There was nothing conservative anymore about the police force, that it is now a politically radical body. And it believes very much in the precepts of what, for the lack of a better phrase, we have to call political correctness. So it naturally finds it harder to be tough on bodies such as Extinction Rebellion or Black Lives Matter than on outfits that it would regard as right-wing.
What did you make of the Extinction Rebellion blockade of printing here in the UK?
Well, I'm shocked to find some people defending it. I had some arguments on social media about it on Saturday.
A few MPs tweeted out support and then deleted
Well,
the
then
tweets.
deleted it, yes. Well, I mean, that's anybody who does that, well, you've got their measure, haven't you? If you mean it, stick to it. It's simultaneously idiotic and gutless is not a good look, is it? But there were people saying it was just a protest, and I said, well, no. If you're trying to prevent the distribution of newspapers, it is an act of censorship, and it is one of the things which, when newspapers were more powerful, one of the things which despotic bodies did was, of course, to prevent their distribution. I seem to remember Indira Gandhi, when she was having her authoritarian period as Prime Minister of India, shutting down, I think cutting off the electricity to the offices of newspapers in Delhi, which opposed her. Similar sort of action. But that was a government. And here are people who want to influence the government, in some cases may end up in government, who don't see anything wrong in preventing the distribution of newspapers with which they disagree. It seems to me undeniable that they'd chosen the printing plant which produced the newspapers with which they disagreed most. So it's obvious an act of censorship. It was not an act of protest. So they wanted to protest, they would stand outside the newspapers. They can march in the streets, but blocking the distribution is preventing the spreading of the contents of the newspapers is a form of censorship and suppression of free speech. And I don't see how anyone can argue differently. And it's just plain wrong.
Let's talk about censorship a little bit. I think you said once that what I did as a revolutionary socialist is try to keep people from exercising their freedom of speech. This was always a tactic of, say, the left in the past.
Well, it's not just the left. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, what is called, what people mostly associate with the right now, the German National Socialism, was certainly a great suppressor of free speech as well. But I think it's a tactic for utopians. The Nazis were racialist utopians. I don't believe they were conservatives. You could say they were of the right in some ways. It's a complicated question because in a lot of what they did was quite actually similar to what communist parties were doing elsewhere in the world. But there's some striking similarities in their propaganda and in youth movements and indeed in some of the economic things they did. But it's, leaving that argument aside for a moment, it's utopians who are always the threat, because utopians believe that they're so good and their objectives are so wonderful that anybody who disagrees with them is not just wrong, but bad. And therefore it is legitimate, first of all, to suppress what they say, and ultimately to kill them, which is why, as I also say, utopia can only ever be approached across a sea of blood, and you never arrive.
So briefly, those sounded like technology companies you were talking about, but talk to me about freedom of speech Look, you write for the Mail Online, or the column that goes on the Mail Online, and we know searching that is difficult. We know a lot of major social media platforms are censoring certain content. You were asked recently for a publication you write for in America to kind of change your views or write something different.
Tone down, I think, would be the polite way of saying to tone down my criticism of the response to COVID. This is by a very nice, largely Roman Catholic American magazine called First Things, for which I've written for some years. I've had a lot of fun writing for them. They're very nice people. And I wrote a column for them in which I made a small parallel between the reaction to cholera in the 19th century in Oxford, where the governing body of Christ Church, one of the richest colleges, actually built walls on either side of a stream to try and stop the cholera getting out. And I was making the point, this is a similar absurdity to much of what we were doing now. And the reaction came back, could I alter it a bit this way and that? And I said, well, no. And so that was the end of our relationship. And I've gone public about it because I think people should know. Much more important, by the way, is what's happening to Sunetra Gupta, the Oxford epidemiologist, very distinguished, a woman of the left, by the way, not of my politics, but she has taken a different view from the British government on the response to COVID-19, and she revealed in an interview with the London Evening Standard last week that she's now finding it difficult to get published in medical journals, in scientific journals, and this is, to me, much more shocking than what happened to me. But there is a general darkening. The cause of supposedly stamping out the coronavirus has now become so dominant and presumed to be so vital that all kinds of principles which would previously have governed life are being thrown to one side. It's extraordinary. But utopianism is abroad, and it's always dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, for 9 years, I streamed conversations just like this every single week, and it wasn't until April of this year when guests started asking questions, similar to what you're saying right now, that YouTube started demonetizing and then deleting and potentially throwing my content off the platform. And my example was, there's people that believe the earth is flat. Bless them, I don't. But their videos are allowed to be on YouTube because they say as an adult, you can entertain those opinions. But if I want to have someone in the chair that is going to question why we're looking at the numbers of COVID tests or anything against what the WHO says, including masks wearing, YouTube told me that goes against their policies and it will be taken down. So, I mean, that's a massive form of censorship.
Yes, the extraordinary thing is they're not embarrassed about it.
No.
This is what makes me so worried. The whole thing about free speech, where I grew up and where I was educated, was that actually, yeah, we are in favor of it. And when I was a Bolshevik in my late teens and early 20s, and when I tried to suppress the freedom of speech of others, I knew perfectly well I was doing something really transgressive, which was considered extremely wicked. And what was interesting in those days, the late 60s and early 70s, was that an awful lot of people in the academy stood up to us and said, how dare you? Are you some kind of Nazis? And we said, no, we're socialists, we believe in. And they said, well, you're behaving like the other lot. And they fought us.
This is where in Britain.
Quite rightly so, yes. There's a very good novel about campus leftism and the whole Cultural Revolution called The History Man by Malcolm Bradbury, in which an incident is described almost identical to one in which I took a very wicked part. It's the thing, I look back on my left-wing time with very mixed feelings, but the thing of which I'm unequivocally ashamed is those attempts I made to suppress freedom of speech. I knew at the time that what I was doing was bad, but I thought that bad things were justified by my good end.
Right. That
was the trap into which I'd fallen. It's the utopian trap. I knew it's bad, but I still did it. But the thing about these people who try and censor the internet now is that they don't even think what they're doing is bad. And nobody stands up to them except marginal figures like me, who don't count for a row of beans at the moment.
It's very hard to stand up to these companies.
Well, they just they go over you. It's like an ant standing up to a tank. Brave ant.
Well, tell me about your journey from, not from the left to the right, because that's too general, being general, but it gives you very interesting insight from the fact that you spent time in the past, like you said, in this cultural revolution, suppressing freedom of speech, and now you're over on the right. So you know their thought patterns, their tactics, not they, but those tactics.
Yeah, I do. And that's why they hate me so much. But I wouldn't have missed it for the world. I can't, in all honesty, look back on it and wish I hadn't done it, because it gave me a depth of education about the world that I wouldn't otherwise have. And I have to say, anybody who's never used Marxist categories and has never examined a society in a Marxist fashion probably will never properly understand the nature of power in politics. And most of the people I've known who've been most effective in politics have had at least a brush with it. So I don't regret it from that point of view. And fortunately, I got out of it before I'd done any serious harm to anybody politically. Though generally I was quite a badly behaved person at that time. So it's been useful to me. I think if people would only listen to me a bit more, it could be quite useful to society as well. But one of the problems with understanding things better than most people is you can't actually explain it to them, because they haven't had your experiences, they haven't done your traveling, they haven't lived where you've lived or seen what you've seen. They don't know what left-wing people are like in private. And so they won't believe you. So it's like being the guy in Invasion of the Body Snatchers trying to say, look, actually, no, this is really bad. And they're saying, no, don't worry about it.
You know, we've been talking a lot about British politics and policy, but when you look at America, I mean, it's almost kind of like the 10X version of this. At least that's what I see, where the left is no longer liberal. They've gone so far, it seems, to where Antifa is sometimes...
This is a fascinating thing about the left. I mean, you say what you like, for instance, about the Guardian, the principal British left liberal newspaper. Until about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, it could be relied upon, if there was an issue of free speech and civil liberties, to be on the right side. Whatever else you had against it, you know that if there was somebody who was being messed around by the courts in some unjust fashion, or if there was some lie being told by the government, the Guardian would be on the right side there. And now, not so. And in general, the left have been very much on the side of authority and the establishment here. I think that this is because the left have become the establishment, that their opposition to these things really arose from them being excluded and outsiders, rather than because of a principled desire to stand up for freedom. And it's a great shame. I miss the old Guardian a lot, and I look at it now and I think, well, what happened to you? You were so important and now you're not there. And it reminds me also of a very clever statement made by a man called Richard Neville, who set up, he was an Australian, came to England, he set up a magazine called Oz, which was a troublemaking, radical, often quite obscene magazine. And not my political ally, but he was certainly very bright. And he said back in the 1960s, there is an inch of difference in this country between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, but it is in that inch that we all live. But since then, that inch has closed. There is no inch. Parliament is no longer adversarial. The two parties don't actually genuinely fight each other over anything. And therefore, the inch in which we lived is gone. It's the adversarial nature of, particularly of British democracy, that was always so important, that the parties really were genuinely rivals. And once they ceased to be and became almost identical in politics, then the liberty of the rest of us just gone.
Wow. And when you see the left in America, where it seems like the alternative now is to destroy or cancel, as we've seen, where does that go from here? And will Britain trend more towards that way in the next 5 years?
I have no idea. I can't. I mean, the two countries are, the other thing you learn when you live in the USA is the two countries are hugely different. And particularly the United States, the left in the United States has a wholly different character, as indeed do conservatives. And the conservative tradition in America is, for instance, it's neither Anglican nor monarchist. So it tends actually much more, in my view, to be liberal in economics, for instance, and generally to be different. So it's very hard to apply American patterns to Britain or British patterns to America, and I try not to do it. But the bad news is coming in both jurisdictions, though, I think I can say without much.
And when you look at America with these, constant violent protests in most major cities, and
is it that bad? I mean, I don't know how widespread it actually is.
I know certain cities continue. It seems like the Portlands and...
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.